"You are a disgrace to this country," Robert De Niro said on live television, his eyes locked on the camera, his voice trembling not with fear, but with rage held back for years. The entire studio went silent. No laughter, no gasps, just silence as if time itself had stopped. What began as a routine interview was now turning into a public explosion. And within seconds, the world realized something had shifted. Before we continue, if stories like this shake you to the core, make sure to subscribe and stay with us till the end. You do not want to miss what happens next. Robert did not hesitate. Sitting across from the host, with lights glaring and the crowd waiting for drama, he leaned forward and said, "I am not scared of anyone anymore. Not even him. That man has fooled this country long enough." It was no longer about politics. It was personal. Years of watching the country change, values collapse, and hate become entertainment. Robert could no longer hold it in. He had waited for the right moment, and now he had it. He called Trump a manipulator, a man who sold fear in place of hope, who divided to win and laughed while families broke apart in silence. The host tried to intervene, but De Niro raised a hand calmly and said, "Let me finish." It was no performance. It was pain. He spoke about children crying in cages, about racism being justified, about truth being mocked. And just when people thought he would cool down, he stared into the lens and said 4 words that no one expected. "Trump is playing dumb." The audience was stunned. Phones were pulled out. Social media began buzzing. But Robert was not done. He said those who still followed Trump were either scared to admit the truth or too proud to accept they were wrong. He questioned their silence. He challenged their loyalty. He asked them, if Trump was your neighbor, would you trust him to watch your child? But as the applause began to rise, as people started clapping and standing, someone else stepped forward quietly, but with purpose. From the backstage, JD Vance entered the frame, walking slowly without a word. The camera caught him approaching like a shadow forming in sunlight. There was no smile on his face, only focus. Everyone in the room turned. Robert stopped speaking. The air froze again. JD took a seat across from him. He leaned in and said, "You done talking, Robert? Because now it is my turn." No one had expected this. Not the host, not the crowd, not even Robert. JD's tone was not loud. It was calm, even respectful. But behind it was something colder, something sharp. And then he said one line that flipped the entire room upside down. "Tell us, Robert, when did you stop acting on screen and start pretending in real life?" The moment the words left his mouth, the audience did not clap. They did not cheer. They held their breath because they knew this was not over. This was war. Robert blinked slowly, as if JD's words had cut deeper than he expected. The smile he once carried was gone. The studio lights, so bright and hot, now felt like spotlights in an interrogation room. Everyone could feel it. JD had not come to debate. He had come to dismantle. JD leaned back in his chair, calm as ever. "You have made a career playing heroes, rebels, and fighters," he said. "But in real life, you are none of those things. You are angry, yes, but anger does not equal truth. You talk about fear, but you live behind security gates, in mansions, far from the chaos you pretend to care about." Robert opened his mouth, but JD raised a single finger. "Let me speak, Robert. You had your turn." The tone was not aggressive, but absolute. A strange silence wrapped around the studio, uncomfortable, raw, and heavy. JD turned to the audience, not for support, but for accountability. You cheer when someone insults a man you do not like. You laugh when celebrities tell you what to think. But ask yourselves, when did you stop thinking for yourselves? When did anger become your compass? The host looked at the crew, unsure whether to cut to break or let it roll. No one moved. This was no longer a show. It was a reckoning. Robert finally stood up. His voice was lower now. I lived through decades of silence. I saw men like Trump rise while decent people stayed quiet. I am speaking now because I can, because I must. JD nodded, almost respectfully. And I am speaking because I see how your words have power. But that power becomes poison when it divides. He paused. You call him dumb, but if he is dumb, what does that say about the millions who voted for him? That question, sharp, brutal, impossible to dodge, hung in the air. Robert hesitated. His hand gripped the edge of the table. For a moment, he seemed smaller, not weaker, but more human. He was not playing a role anymore. This was not rehearsed. JD did not let up. You blame one man for everything. But the truth is, this country was broken long before Trump. You just ignored it. Until it became uncomfortable. Robert stepped forward. No, I saw it. I lived it. But he made it worse. He made cruelty normal. And you made division glamorous, JD replied. You dress it in big speeches, dramatic music, and applause. But it is still division. It is still hate. You just wear it better. The room was ice. No one spoke. Even the audience had stopped shifting in their seats. Then JD leaned in one last time and said, You say Trump is the problem. But sometimes the loudest voices against him are just reflections of him in a different suit. Robert's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in recognition. This was not just about Trump anymore. It was about something deeper. Something neither man was ready to admit. And the room? It waited for the next move, unsure who would speak first. Robert looked down for a moment, as if searching for something inside himself. His hands rested on the table, but his fingers twitched slightly, betraying the storm behind his silence. Then, with a slow breath, he lifted his eyes and spoke, not as an actor, not as a legend, but as a man who had finally been pushed to the edge. You know what the difference is between me and him? Robert's voice was soft now, almost whispering, but sharp enough to cut. He builds his power on fear. I build mine on truth, even when it hurts. JD gave a half smile, the kind that comes when someone thinks they have already won. Truth is not a weapon, Robert. It is a mirror, and you are not ready to look into it. I already have, Robert replied. I looked into it the night I saw a father deported while his kids cried in a parking lot. I looked into it when a black teenager was shot for holding a phone. I looked into it when lies were louder than facts and people started calling that leadership. JD leaned forward. Then maybe you should also look into the mirror when riots burn cities, when crime eats neighborhoods, when police walk away because they are treated like villains. Who speaks for them, Robert? The moment. Twisted again. Both men were right and both were wrong. That was the power of the exchange. It was not about winning. It was about how deep they could go without breaking. The host finally tried to interject. Gentlemen, but JD held up a hand. We are not done, he said, not asking for permission but giving notice. Robert turned slightly toward the audience now. His voice was steadier. This is not about sides anymore. This is about who we are becoming. I may not have all the answers, but I know the cost of silence, and I will not pay it anymore. JD slowly stood, adjusting the microphone on his lapel. You see silence as weakness. I see it as discipline. There is a difference between noise and impact, Robert, and right now you are all noise. That hit hard, even Robert flinched. But before he could reply, JD looked straight at him and asked the question no one expected. Tell me, Robert, if Trump is dumb and his followers are blind, then what do you call the people who watched it happen for years and did nothing? The studio fell dead quiet again. The audience was not just watching, they were questioning themselves. Robert took a breath. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they were tired. Or maybe, he paused, they were waiting for someone to remind them they were not alone. JD's face changed slightly. Just for a second, something softened. It was not surrender. It was understanding. But just as the moment felt like it could turn, someone backstage shouted something. And suddenly, the door behind them opened. The studio door creaked as it opened, slow and deliberate, drawing every pair of eyes toward it. A tall woman stepped inside, her heels echoing against the floor. She was not part of the crew. She was not a celebrity. Yet the tension shifted the moment she appeared. Her name was Evelyn Hart, a retired school principal from Ohio, someone no one expected, but someone Robert and JD both recognized. Evelyn walked forward, holding the folder in her hand. She did not smile. She did not wave. She simply placed the folder on the table between the two men and said, "If either of you actually care about this country, you will read this." JD looked confused. Robert looked uneasy. "What is this?" JD asked. "Test scores. Crime. Reports. Mental health statistics. All from one school district, mine." Her voice was steady, without tremble, but every word carried weight. "While both of you were on television, we were losing kids, not to Trump, not to Hollywood. To silence, to hopelessness." Robert reached for the folder, opening it carefully. His eyes moved down the pages, and his jaw tightened. JD stood motionless, watching. Evelyn continued, "You speak in headlines, he speaks in speeches. Meanwhile, children cannot read by the 5th grade. Teenagers are being buried before they finish high school. And no one listens until someone yells loud enough." JD finally took the folder, flipping through it quickly, then paused at a photo. A girl barely 16 smiling in her graduation robe. "She was mine," Evelyn said. "She was found in a parking lot. Empty pill bottle. No note." The room cracked, not with sound, but with grief. Real grief, not political. Not scripted. Robert lowered his head. "I am sorry." Evelyn shook her head. "Do not be. Just understand that anger without direction is chaos. And we have had enough of it." JD sat back down. "So what do you want from us? Silence?" "I want honesty," she said. "Not just about him or you, about everything. About how we let this country rot from the inside while blaming the other side." Robert looked at JD, but this time with less fire, more fatigue. "Maybe we are both too far gone." JD replied, "Or maybe we are exactly what people need to see, two people who finally stop talking and start listening." The room softened. The audience leaned forward again, not for drama, but for hope. It was rare now, precious. Evelyn turned and began to walk away. But before she reached the door, she stopped and looked back. "By the way, that girl in the photo? Her parents voted for Trump. Her counselor loved your films. And neither of them saw the signs. So tell me again, who exactly is to blame?" And with that, she left. No one moved. The folder still lay open on the table. The photo stared up at them like a mirror. And neither Robert nor JD could look away. The silence after Evelyn left was not just quiet, it was suffocating. The kind that made every breath feel like glass. Robert leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the photo, his fingers trembling slightly. JD's usual confidence had dimmed. The edges of his voice, once sharp, were now dulled by something heavier than anger truth. Robert finally spoke, but his voice was low, rough, stripped of all performance. "I have spent my life standing in front of cameras. I have played kings and killers, saints and monsters. But I have never felt more fake than I do right now." JD did not respond. He just stared ahead, as if the weight of Evelyn's words had cracked something inside him, something he had spent years pretending did not exist. Robert looked over, not with defiance, but with honesty. "You were right, you know. About me. About the speeches. I thought if I yelled loud enough, people would listen. But I think all I did was give them permission to hate louder." JD finally turned to face him. "And I thought if I stayed calm, if I used the right words, People would listen. But they did not. They only heard what they wanted to hear. There was no audience reaction now. No clapping, no shifting in seats. It felt less like a show and more like a confession. Robert rubbed his face and said, "Do you remember what Evelyn said about the girl? The counselor who loved my films? The parents who voted for him?" JD nodded. "Yeah, it means this is bigger than you and me. Bigger than Trump, bigger than politics." Robert looked at the photo again. "It means we all failed her." JD leaned forward slowly. "So what do we do now?" Robert paused. Maybe we stop trying to win. Maybe we start trying to understand." JD raised an eyebrow. "You think people want that? Understanding? I think they are starving for it," Robert said. "And we just keep feeding them outrage." Light blinked on the studio wall, signaling a commercial break. The producer's voice crackled through the earpiece, but neither man reacted. The cameras kept rolling. JD spoke again, softer now. "When I was younger, I believed in heroes. I believed someone would come and fix it all. But now I think maybe the best we can do is admit we are broken too." Robert smiled faintly. "You ever think it is not about fixing the world? Maybe it is just about not letting it break any more than it already has." JD looked at him, and for the first time that night, he nodded, not as a politician, not as an opponent, but as a man who understood pain. Then Robert said quietly, "Do you think anyone's still watching?" JD looked toward the camera. "They are now." And just as they both turned toward the lens, a voice came from the side of the stage. But this time, it was not an interruption. It was someone they never expected to see again. A soft, worn voice drifted from the edge of the stage. "You both talk like the world is ending. Maybe it already did." The crew turned. The audience leaned forward. Even Robert sat up straighter. Walking slowly into view was an old man, his hair white, his posture bent, but his presence undeniable. It was Frank Delaney, a former Vietnam veteran, community volunteer, and once a civil rights marcher whose name barely made the news anymore. He had not been invited, but no one stopped him. He stepped into the spotlight with the caution of age but the strength of purpose. Robert recognized him first. "Frank, I thought you gone?" Frank smiled faintly. "I was, until I watched this circus." JD stood, confused. "You know him?" Robert nodded slowly. "He was on the steps of Selma. He carried a bleeding man through a gas cloud while I was still learning how to memorize lines." Frank raised a hand. "I did what needed doing. Now I am here for the same reason." He turned to the camera, then to both men. "You think this country breaks because of one man? Or two? It breaks because everyone keeps looking for someone to blame instead of someone to become." He took another step forward, his cane tapping softly against the floor. "You both speak well. You both hurt deep. But hurt alone is not leadership, and rage is not direction. What we lack is humility. What we lack is memory." The room felt smaller, quieter, as if the air itself wanted to listen. Frank continued, "I have seen people beaten for their skin. I have watched friends die for the right to vote. And I have seen this country survive hate thicker than today's. You know how we survived? Not by screaming, not by pointing fingers, but by marching forward side by side, even when we could not stand each other." He looked at Robert. "You have a voice, son. Use it to lift." He looked at JD. "You have power. Use it to protect." Then he looked straight into the lens. "And to everyone watching, stop waiting for heroes. Be the neighbor who listens. Be the teacher who notices. Be the father who stays." A pause followed, not the awkward kind, the holy kind. Robert wiped his eyes without hiding it. JD lowered his head slightly, no longer resisting the emotions rising in his throat. Frank turned around, walking back toward the dark. "You asked if anyone is still watching?" he said over his shoulder. They are not just watching, they are waiting. Then he vanished behind the curtain. The studio did not cheer. It did not move. It breathed. Robert finally spoke. "I think we just found the ending." JD nodded. "No, we just found the beginning." And for the first time all night, both men stood side by side, not as rivals, not as symbols, but as two human beings who had finally remembered what it meant to be part of something bigger than themselves. Fade to black.